Uncle Ted! Sarah ran to hug him, tears streaming down her face. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I only found out now from the news. Ted returned the hug affectionately, but his eyes sought those of Dr. Johnson, who understood the silent message, and discreetly left the room. Buddy, in turn, approached Sarah, sniffing her curiously. "Sarah, my dear, we need to talk." Ted gestured for her to sit down. "There are things you need to know, things about your brother Mark." Sarah's expression changed instantly. "What about Mark, Uncle? He hasn't been answering my calls since yesterday. Your mother, my sister Emily, before leaving this world, made me promise that I would take care of you two as if you were my own children." Ted paused, his hands trembling slightly. "And that's what I tried to do all these years. But Mark, he changed a lot since he started working at that development company." Sarah listened attentively, while her hands absent-mindedly caressed Buddy's fur, who seemed to have decided that she was worthy of trust. Horizon Developments? But it's such a respected company. "On the outside, my child, on the outside." Ted adjusted himself in the bed, a worried expression crossing his face. 3 months ago, I discovered some documents in Mark's office. Construction projects in environmental preservation areas, falsified licenses, bribes. He's involved in something much bigger and more dangerous than he imagines. "No." Sarah shook her head in denial. "Mark wouldn't do that. He wouldn't. That's why I changed my will." Ted held his niece's hand. "I can't allow my assets to be used to finance illegal activities. The money will go to the social project in Skid Row to help children who need a chance in life." At that moment, Buddy started growling softly, his eyes fixed on the door. Seconds later, Mark appeared in the doorway, impeccably dressed in his grey suit as if nothing had happened the night before. What a touching scene! His voice was smooth but carried a coldness that made Sarah shudder. The family reunited in the hospital, and look, they even got a mascot. Buddy positioned himself between Mark and the bed, the hair on his back bristling, a more intense growl escaping his throat. Mark stopped, observing the animal with a mixture of surprise and irritation. "Bro, where have you been? I called you all night." Sarah stood up but didn't approach her brother, something in Buddy's behavior keeping her alert. "Working, sis. You know how it is. Not everyone can drop everything to keep vigil at the hospital." His eyes fixed on Ted. "And how's our dear uncle? Recovered from the accident?" The word accident left his lips like poison, making Ted grip the sheets tightly. Sarah looked from one to the other, feeling that there was something unsaid hanging in the air. "Mark," Ted began, but was interrupted by a nurse who rushed into the room. "Dr. Johnson needs to speak urgently with Miss Sarah." The nurse seemed agitated. "It's about your uncle's tests." Sarah hesitated, looking at Ted, who nodded slightly. "You can go, my child. Buddy is here with me." As Sarah followed the nurse, Mark took a step forward, but Buddy advanced as well, his growl intensifying. The two stared at each other in a silent confrontation, while Ted watched, feeling that this moment was just the beginning of a much bigger battle that was to come. Detective Harding observed the scene before him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. In his office at the police station, Sarah sat nervously while holding a folder with documents, and beside her, surprisingly, was Buddy, who had somehow managed to follow her there. The dog maintained his attentive posture, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. "So, Miss Sarah, you're telling me that you found these documents in your brother's office?" Harding adjusted his reading glasses, flipping through the pages with growing interest. "Yes, Detective. After I left the hospital, I went to Mark's office to get some papers that Uncle Ted asked for, but I found much more than I expected." Sarah took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "They're projects from Horizon Developments, all in environmental preservation areas in the Oregon countryside. And there's more. There are records of suspicious payments, names of politicians, astronomical amounts." Harding frowned, analyzing each document with redoubled attention. "This is very serious, Miss Sarah. The rain showed no signs of letting up in Portland, Oregon that March afternoon. The sky, heavy with dark clouds, poured its tears over the city as if sharing in the anguish that hung in the air. At Providence Medical Center, the bustling corridors witnessed another hectic day, but it was in room 304 that an extraordinary story was beginning to unfold. Ted, a 78-year-old gentleman with cotton white hair and eyes that carried the weight of many stories, rested in his hospital bed. His face still bore the marks of the terror he had experienced the night before when fate decided to introduce him to his unlikely savior, a dark-haired mutt named Buddy. The animal hadn't left the hospital since they arrived. Defying all the establishment's rules, he had been granted special permission to stay, thanks to Ted's insistence and the medical team's understanding, who recognized the unique bond formed between the two. Buddy remained vigilant at the foot of the bed, his attentive eyes alternating between the room's door and his new human friend. Dr. Johnson, a young and compassionate physician, entered the room for another evaluation. While checking Ted's vital signs, he couldn't contain his curiosity about the events of the previous night. "Mr. Ted, you were very lucky. It's not every day we see such an extraordinary rescue as yours." Ted stroked Buddy's head, who approached upon hearing the doctor's voice. "Doctor, this dog isn't an ordinary animal. He has something special. When I was in the cold waters of the river, feeling my strength ebbing away, it was he who brought me back to life. But there's more to this story. Much more." The elderly man paused, his gaze lost in the memories of the previous night. "Doctor," Johnson noticed the hesitation in his voice and sat in the chair next to the bed, showing he was willing to listen. Buddy, as if understanding the importance of that moment, rested his head on the mattress, his eyes fixed on Ted. "Doctor, that bridge. I didn't fall by accident." Ted's voice trembled slightly. "I was taken there. Someone wanted me to disappear, and that someone knew exactly what they were doing." The doctor furrowed his brow, his expression becoming more serious. "Mr. Ted, are you saying that?" "Yes, doctor. Mark, my own nephew, tried to get rid of me." Ted took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that revelation. "He discovered that I had changed my will. All my assets, which were previously to be divided between him and his sister, Sarah, will now go to a social project that helps underprivileged children in the Skid Row neighborhood." Dr. Johnson adjusted his glasses, processing the gravity of that information. "Have you reported this to the police?" "Not yet. Mark is an influential man in the city, has important connections. I'm afraid of what might happen if I say something without having concrete evidence." Ted looked at Buddy, who kept his attentive eyes fixed on him. "But this dog, he saw everything, and something tells me he understands more than we imagine." At that moment, as if confirming Ted's words, Buddy suddenly stood up, his ears alert. His eyes turned to the window of the room where the rain continued to fall. A shadow passed quickly through the hospital's external corridor, catching the animal's attention. Ted gripped the doctor's hand tightly. "Dr. Johnson, I need you to help me. I can't trust many people right now, but I know you're different. There's something bigger happening, something that goes beyond a simple family dispute." The doctor nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation. "You can count on me, Mr. Ted, but you need to tell me everything from the beginning." As the storm raged outside, Ted prepared to reveal a story that would forever change the lives of all involved. Buddy remained at his post, a silent guardian of secrets that were only beginning to come to light. On the horizon, even darker clouds approached, foreshadowing that the real storm was just beginning. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll continue. The next morning, as the city began to recover from the storm, Sarah, Ted's niece, hurried through the hospital corridors. Her dark brown hair was tied in a messy bun, and the dark circles under her eyes betrayed a sleepless night. Upon reaching room 304, she found her uncle talking to Dr. Johnson, while Buddy remained in his constant vigil. "We're talking about $1 million scheme of corruption and environmental destruction. And there's more, Detective." Sarah took out another envelope from her bag. "I found this hidden in a false drawer. They're photos of Uncle Ted. Someone had been following him for weeks before the incident on the bridge." The detective spread the photos on the desk. In each of them, Ted appeared in different situations, leaving home, at the bank, talking to people. It was systematic and professional surveillance. Buddy approached the desk, his nose sniffing the photographs. Suddenly he started barking, pointing with his muzzle to one particular image. In the photo, partially hidden behind a tree, there was a man observing Ted. This man... Harding picked up the photo, bringing it closer to his eyes. I know him. It's Richard Miller, a private investigator known for working for businessmen in the city. And not the most ethical ones. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. Detective, what's going on? Why would my brother hire someone to follow our uncle? Before Harding could answer, the door to the office burst open. It was Dr. Johnson, breathless and visibly disturbed. Detective, something happened at the hospital. He tried to catch his breath. Someone broke into the laboratory during the night. All of Mr. Ted's tests disappeared, along with the blood samples and the medical records. Buddy immediately became alert, his hair bristling. Sarah stood up, panic etched on her face. Oh my God, Uncle Ted, I need to get back to the hospital. Calm down, Miss Sarah. Harding was already picking up his phone. I'm going to dispatch a patrol car to secure his room. Dr. Johnson, did you notice anything else suspicious? Yes, the security cameras in the hallway were turned off during the break-in, but Dr. Johnson hesitated for a moment. There's something you need to know about Mr. Ted's tests, something I discovered before they were stolen. Sarah gripped the doctor's arm tightly. What is it, doctor? Please tell me my uncle is okay. The tests showed traces of a substance in his blood, a substance that has been administered for weeks, maybe months. Someone was slowly poisoning Mr. Ted. The silence that followed was deafening. Buddy let out a low, painful howl, as if understanding the gravity of the revelation. And there's more, Dr. Johnson continued, his voice trembling slightly. This substance, it's produced in only one laboratory in Portland. And do you know who the main shareholder of that laboratory is? Horizon Developments. Harding completed, his eyes narrowing. Your brother's business empire, Miss Sarah? Sarah staggered, needing to lean on the desk to avoid falling. Everything was starting to make a terrible sense. Mark's strange behavior, the change in the will, the attack on the bridge. It was a meticulously crafted plan. Buddy approached her, touching his nose to her hand, as if offering comfort. Detective Harding began making calls, mobilizing his team. Dr. Johnson frantically consulted his cell phone, trying to contact the hospital. At that moment, a thunderclap split the Portland sky, announcing another storm. But the real tempest was just beginning to form, and its lightning threatened to illuminate even darker secrets. Room 304 of the hospital was quiet when Sarah returned, accompanied by Buddy and 2 police officers. Ted was sleeping, his serene face masking the turmoil of events. A nurse was checking his vital signs, making notes on a new clipboard since the original medical record had disappeared. How is he? Sarah whispered to the nurse while Buddy resumed his protective position beside the bed. Stable, but... The nurse hesitated, looking nervously around. Something strange is happening. Dr. Johnson left explicit orders for all your uncle's medication to be checked 3 times before being administered. And just a while ago we found this. She handed Sarah a small empty vial hidden inside her pocket. The label had been partially removed, but it was still possible to see, a code printed on the side. It was hidden in the medication cart, mixed with the other medicines. If Dr. Johnson hadn't alerted us... Sarah held the vial with trembling hands, while Buddy approached, sniffing the object with interest. His low growl confirmed that something was wrong. At that moment, Sarah's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. Hospital rooftop, 15 minutes. Come alone. I know the truth about your brother. She looked at Ted, then at the police officers at the door. Her mind was working frantically, weighing the risks. Buddy, sensing her agitation, leaned against her leg, as if saying he was there to protect her. Officer Thompson, she called one of the policemen, I need to take care of something urgent. Can you keep an eye on my uncle? I'll be back in a few minutes. The officer nodded and Sarah left the room with Buddy on her heels. She tried to make the dog go back, but he refused to leave her alone. Maybe it was better this way. The hospital rooftop was deserted when they arrived. The strong wind from the previous night had given way to a gentle breeze, and the clouds were beginning to dissipate, revealing a sky painted with the orange hues of sunset. Miss Sarah. A voice emerged from the shadows, making her turn quickly. It was Richard Miller, the private investigator from the photos. I see you brought company. Buddy positioned himself between Sarah and the newcomer, tense but silent. What do you want? What do you know about my brother? Sarah kept her voice firm despite the fear she felt. I know that Horizon Developments is just the tip of the iceberg. Richard approached slowly, maintaining a respectful distance from Buddy. Your brother is involved with something much bigger. An organization that controls not only the real estate market, but also pharmaceutical laboratories, politicians. Why are you telling me this? Because, Richard hesitated, looking nervously over his shoulder. Because they found out I was investigating on my own. Your brother hired me to follow your uncle, but the more I dug, the more dirt I found. And now? A sudden noise made everyone turn. Mark was standing at the rooftop door, his normally controlled face contorted into a mask of fury. Richard, he shook his head in false disappointment. I always knew you were a mediocre investigator, but I never thought you'd be so stupid. Mark, what are you doing? Sarah took a step back while Buddy advanced, growling threateningly. Protecting our interests, sis, as I've always done. Mark pulled something from his jacket pocket. You know, Mom and Dad always wanted me to take care of you, but you're making it very difficult. Sarah's voice faltered. You poisoned Uncle Ted. You tried to kill him on the bridge. Why? Money, power, influence, the usual. Mark shrugged, as if discussing the weather. Uncle Ted discovered things he shouldn't have, and that story about donating everything to a social project? We couldn't allow that. Richard slowly began to move towards the door, but Mark stopped him with a look. Oh no, my dear, you're not going anywhere. You've already caused enough problems. Time seemed to freeze on that rooftop. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky blood red. Sarah looked at her brother and no longer recognized the boy she used to play with in childhood. In his place was a stranger, a man consumed by greed. Buddy maintained his protective position, his eyes alternating between Mark and the door, calculating his options. The wind blew stronger, bringing with it the distant sound of sirens. Night was coming, and with it, the moment of truth was approaching. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll continue. The hospital rooftop transformed into a silent battlefield. The wind whipped at the clothes of those present, while the last ray of sunlight tinged the sky red. Mark maintained his threatening posture. Richard was paralyzed by fear, and Sarah felt her heart beating erratically. Buddy, however, remained firm, his eyes fixed on Mark, ready to protect Sarah at any cost. You won't be able to escape this, Mark. Sarah tried to keep her voice steady. The police already have the evidence. The Horizon documents, the photos, Uncle Ted's tests. Mark laughed, a cold sound without humor. Evidence? You really think I would be so careless? At this very moment, a team is erasing all traces. The documents you found, falsified, the photos, manipulated. In a few hours, there will be nothing linking me to any irregularity. And the poison in Uncle Ted's blood? How will you explain? That? What poison? Mark smiled maliciously. All the tests disappeared, remember? And now with the new medical record, Uncle Ted is just a confused old man who had an accident. Maybe he's even developing some kind of dementia. Sad, isn't it? Richard chose this moment to try to escape, but Mark was faster. In seconds, he was blocking the only exit from the rooftop. You know what's most interesting, sis? Mark continued, his voice taking on an almost didactic tone. You never really understood the game. Mom and Dad always protected me, always prepared me for this. Why do you think they traveled so much? Business, they said. But you never questioned what kind of business, did you? Sarah felt her legs weaken. No, you're lying. Our family built an empire, Sarah. Generation after generation, keeping up appearances, doing what was necessary. Uncle Ted was the only one who refused to participate, always with his foolish ideals of justice and kindness. Mark took a step forward. He needed to be removed from the path, but you can still choose the right side. At that moment, Buddy began to bark insistently, not at Mark but at the rooftop door. Seconds later, it burst open violently. Detective Harding entered, accompanied by several police officers, all with weapons drawn. Mark Montero, you're under arrest. The detective's voice thundered across the rooftop. "We have everything recorded. Your confession, your threats, everything." Mark's face paled. "What?" Sarah pulled out a small microphone hidden in her blouse. "You weren't the only one who learned to play, bro." "Impossible." Mark looked around, searching for an escape route. "You have no idea of the power you're facing. There are big people behind this, people who can make you disappear. With one phone call." "Oh, about that," the detective smiled. "While we were here, the FBI was paying a surprise visit to several offices in Portland, including Horizon Development's headquarters. It seems some very interesting documents were found in a secret safe." "Original documents." Mark staggered, his mask of confidence finally breaking. "How?" "You should have paid more attention to Uncle Ted's dog." Sarah approached Buddy, stroking his head. "While you were busy watching me at the hospital, he sniffed out the way to your office. Dr. Johnson followed him and found the safe. It seems you're not the only one who knows how to keep secrets." The police officers approached to arrest Mark, but he still had one last card up his sleeve. With a quick movement, he grabbed Sarah, using her as a shield. "Nobody moves!" he shouted, backing towards the edge of the rooftop, "or she'll join Uncle Ted in that river." It was his last mistake. Before anyone could react, Buddy leaped. His teeth closed on Mark's arm, making him release Sarah with a cry of pain. In seconds, the police officers subdued him. As Mark was handcuffed and led off the rooftop, his threats and shouts echoing through the hospital corridors, Sarah knelt beside Buddy, hugging him tightly. "You're much more than a hero, you know," she whispered in his ear. "You're a guardian angel." The sun finally set on the horizon, taking with it the last shadows of that day. But the night that arrived no longer brought fear or uncertainty. It was a night of justice, of revealed truths, of broken chains. 6 months had passed since that night on the hospital rooftop. The morning dawned radiant in Portland, and the sun poured generously over the new Emily Montero Community Center in the heart of the Skid Row neighborhood. The location, once an abandoned lot, now housed a modern and welcoming structure, the fruit of Ted's dream and persistence. Dozens of children played in the newly inaugurated courtyard, their laughter echoing through the center's corridors. On one of the garden benches, Ted observed the scene with tears in his eyes, Buddy faithfully lying at his feet. Sarah approached, bringing 2 cups of coffee. "Are you all right, Uncle?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Never been better, my dear." Ted smiled, accepting the coffee. "Your mother would be proud. Not of what happened to Mark, of course, but of seeing her dream realized here." Sarah sighed, thinking of her brother. Mark had been convicted, along with several other businessmen and politicians involved in the scheme. Horizon Developments was dissolved, its assets sold to pay indemnities and finance social projects. "Do you think she knew?" "Mum, about the family business?" "Emily was always a complex woman." Ted took a sip of coffee. "She grew up watching our parents build their empire the same way Mark tried to maintain his. But in the end, she chose a different path. Why do you think she entrusted you to me and not to your father's business partners?" A little girl approached, timidly offering a cookie to Buddy, who accepted it with gentleness. The dog had become a sort of mascot for the community center, adored by all the children. "You know, Uncle," Sarah smiled, observing the interaction, "sometimes I wonder if Buddy is really just a dog, the way he saved us, how he knew exactly what to do. There are mysteries in this world that we don't need to fully understand." Ted caressed Buddy's head. "The important thing is that he taught us something valuable, that true power lies not in money or influence, but in the ability to do good, to protect those we need to." Dr. Johnson crossed the courtyard, carrying a box of medications for the clinic that operated in the center. He waved at them, smiling. After everything that happened, he had become a close friend, offering his services voluntarily to help the community. "And Richard?" Sarah asked. "Have you heard anything from him?" "He's working as an investigator for a human rights NGO." "Teddy," replied. It seems he finally found a better purpose for his skills. A gentle breeze blew, bringing the aroma of flowers from the community garden. In the center of the courtyard, a plaque shone under the sun. Emily Montero Community Center, where dreams grow and hopes flourish. Uncle, Sarah held Ted's hand, do you think I'll ever be able to forgive Mark? Forgiveness is a journey, my dear, not a destination. Ted responded softly. Your brother chose his path, but that doesn't mean you need to carry the weight of his choices. Buddy raised his head, his wise eyes fixed on Sarah, as if understanding every word. He had been more than a hero in that story. He was a catalyst for change, a silent guardian who helped bring to light long-buried truths. One of the teachers called the children for music class, and soon the sound of guitars and flutes filled the air. Ted closed his eyes, letting the soft melody lull his memories. Of all the battles he had faced in life, this had been the most difficult, but also the most rewarding. Shall we go, Uncle? Sarah stood up, extending her hand. The children want you to tell another story. Ted smiled, accepting the help to stand up. Buddy followed them, his tail wagging happily. As they walked towards the activity room, the sun shone even brighter, as if blessing this new beginning. There, in that piece of Skid Row, a new story was being written. A story of redemption, of hope, of love. And on every page of that story, the paw prints of a mutt reminded everyone that the greatest heroes sometimes come in the most unlikely packages. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Ted, Sarah, and the brave Buddy has touched your hearts. To continue this journey of emotions, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here, clicking on the left. If you enjoyed this narrative of love, courage, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like to the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the transformative power of good. Don't miss our upcoming content. We're waiting for you in the comments.